No, technically it's all one word. Uh, yeah. So people go back and forth with a lowercase and capital B, and I usually I never really care. Uh, no, I mean, I guess a couple high-level talking points. I'm the principal and CTO of Snapback. Started Snapback in February of 2020. So literally right as COVID was hitting. But even through that, managed to continue growth. We do a lot of work in the esports space, house of worship, themed entertainment install, corporate show, blah blah blah, and concert touring. However you want to say all that. Based in Atlanta, but have the entire team is remote, so we're kind of scattered across the country. We're not actually all living in the same place. Yeah, yeah, it's Kongvold. Cool, sounds good. Cool. Like how do we handle backup failover? Yeah, we can. I mean, on this tour, the way that we're doing it is uh, we're not actually doing it the way that you can in Pixera, where it's like a usage preset or like an auto failover feature. Like for the show, we're actually just running it as separate instances in the same uh, uh,
Everybody, Baby with Pixera here. Thanks so much for joining us. Got a small but mighty crew coming in today on the live stream. Hopefully, more folks join us, and hopefully some folks will enjoy the talk we have today. Out in if you're watching the recording, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Wanted to welcome everyone in today. I've got a good friend of Pixera's here. Bryce Kongvold with Snapback Productions is here to talk about a tour he is finishing up programming with. They are just getting ready to go out. Bryce is the principal and CTO of Snapback Productions, which started in February of 2020. So, so I'm sure we've got some interesting stories about COVID and some of the live streams that he got put up. Snapback and Bryce typically they do all kinds of things, but esports, house of worship, themed entertainment, concert touring, corporate events, all that kind of stuff. Based in Atlanta, although they're kind of all spread out. Bryce, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to actually talk about probably one of my favorite projects I've been able to be a part of recently.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, so talk to us a little bit about the project, and then we'll jump over to the slideshow that we've got going.
Yeah, so the tour that we're currently working on is Alton Brown Live. It's his last bite tour, which he claims to be his farewell tour. I worked with him back in 2021 on a previous tour that he said was going to be his last run, and now we're back. So he swears up, down, and sideways that this is it, but I think all of us kind of agree that we'll believe it when we actually see it. Um, but yeah, so we're actually out on the road with him right now. We just got to one of our first couple days off.
Gotcha. And where are you coming to us live from today?
I'm in Norfolk, Virginia.
Norfolk, Virginia. Sweet. Well, that's exciting. So tell me about a little bit more about the tour itself, and I'll hop us over to a the slideshow that we've got, and you can kind of walk us through some of that.
Yeah, so the tour is all about Alton Brown, which if you don't know who he had a Food Network show, Good Eats, for many many years, and then he brought it back a few years ago with Good Eats: The Return. He was also on Iron Chef. He kind of all around culinary food personality type person.
One of my
But
one of my
he
personal favorites. Big fan.
Yeah. So he, like I said, I worked with him previously on his last tour, and Magic Space Entertainment, which is the producing company of the tour. They uh, brought about this current tour, excuse me, Last Bite. And when this came up about a year ago, he reached out to us directly and said, "Hey, we would love to have you back out. We would love to engage a little bit sooner." Because there was some stuff that he wanted to do for the tour that involved a little bit more in-depth strategizing on the front end. The last time I went out, I literally walked on site cold, was handed a hard drive full of content, and had to figure it out in the span of about 72 hours. So this time it was kind of a nice refresh to be able to come in early and chat through creatively what are the things you want to do, what will the technology that we're bringing allow to kind of open up creatively some other ideas you might not have thought were possible with the stage. The last run we did was all projection. This time we have an LED wall that's on
Mhm.
Kinesis. So we're able to kind of do some more creative elements with him. But
So
yeah, so the tour as a whole, it's kind of the first act is mostly monologue with some LED wall and stage movements that kind of help him tell some stories. And then the second act is a little bit more of the same, but then it sets up a large set piece that him and his team custom fabricated that
oh,
lets us
cool.
cook. I think it's 80 hot dogs in 3 minutes on
Oh my
stage.
goodness. Holy crap.
Um, so yeah.
Talk to me. That's awesome to like the contrast between, if you're, especially if you're an operator or a programmer, we've all been handed a hard drive of content and said, this needs to happen in the next day or two. Talk to me about the contrast. Can I ask, did you do the last show on PIXERA, or is this the first one that you've done on PIXERA?
So the last one that we did was actually on Disguise.
Okay.
This tour we switched it from Disguise to Pixera.
Okay. And what are, talk to me about like creatively, you talked about how you were able to engage at kind of a different level with the is Alton Brown's kind of functioning as writer and director and probably kind of all roles kind of wrapped into one. How does engaging with that person earlier in the process as a programmer and as kind of the creative technologist, how does that allow you to make a better show? Like what were some of the advantages that came with that?
Yeah, so the last time when we went out, the because it was such a last minute, on site, here's a stack of content, we just needed to kind of figure it out. What ended up happening was the tour kind of was more of like a glorified PowerPoint presentation where it was just basically just next, 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 next. There was some stuff that they wanted to do that once we got on site, we ended up cutting all of it just because there wasn't enough time. I didn't have enough advance warning to be able to figure out, by myself, how can we pull these things off. And so it ended up kind of limiting what we were able to do. This time around, because we engaged much sooner from the very beginning, we had conversations of what if the entire scene was rendering in real time out of Unreal or Notch. And as the LED wall moved, we actually could track the wall within those scenes. And well, what if, by doing that, could we then go into a living room scene that, has a TV in the corner that once, the wall moves in and reveals the TV, then we force a zoom into the TV to reveal a video playback element that he might want to have. And so we were able to have a lot of those conversations early and kind of kick the bucket of how do you want to tell the story, which then ultimately helped us to dial in the technical side of what do we actually need to have on the show hardware wise to pull these asks off. How many cameras do we need to add to the tour? Are there any special sound effects that we might need to cue? And so we were able to deliver a much more in-depth uh, final deliverable product to him, because we engaged so much sooner.
And do you think did you end up ultimately going with any of that kind of Unreal notch effect stuff? Is any of that in the show, or did you kind of have to cut that for other reasons?
We ended up cutting it just because of other reasons. From the time that we showed up on site for this project to the time that we had our first show, we only had 2.5 days. And so it became a timeline constraint of we just don't have time to get on site and integrate with all of the departments for the first time when we have to immediately step into rehearsals on the load-in day and have stuff queued and ready to go as fast as humanly possible. Because even though we engaged sooner, unfortunately, the content side, there were elements that had to be sized correctly. And when we got on site, the way that the content had been delivered, we didn't have enough canvas left. And so a lot of the content had to get re-rendered, which kind of slowed us down. And so it just kind of turned into a timeline constraint.
Gotcha. We'll jump back into the slideshow in a second here, but talk to me a little bit about content. One of, as many people know, one of the hills I will die on is has to do with codecs and codec choice, and making sure that you're communicating with your content producers. How does that pipeline work for you? What kind of codecs did you end up choosing? Can you just talk to me about that content process?
Yeah, so the codec that we have everything delivering at is Notch LC. We kind of as a standard at Snapback, every time that we work on a project, we typically just default to Notch LC unless there's a reason why we might want to use something else. But for this particular project, because him and his entire team, they're all TV guys, they're all film guys. They're used to having, perfectly in-depth color spaces, everything formatted that looks crisp on a laptop screen or on a computer or TV monitor. We knew that that was something that we needed to pay attention to on the front side. And so having a codec like Notch LC that does open up a bit more of the color space without us having to step into a completely uncompressed workflow, we knew was just going to match what they were looking for out the gate. And since for us it's a default anyways, it just kind of worked perfectly.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, we could tell kind of by the by your slideshow here that color seems to be at play. So yeah, why don't you kind of walk us through it a little bit? I think you have a gear list coming up next.
Yeah, so for the tour, ultimately Snapback was engaged to not only provide the programming side of everything, but we also provided the entire video system with the exception of the LED wall. So from a server standpoint, we have two of our own custom built servers that are on the show. They're a little bit overspec for what this tour currently is and how we're utilizing everything. But internally, with all the other projects we work on, especially with the esports projects, we tend to just kind of try and spec everything the same. And so everything's a little bit beefier just because of those other projects. But it's the machines have an A6000 ADA, AMD Threadripper CPUs, 128 gigs of DDR5 memory, and then the 4 terabyte content drive that we store everything on is actually a PCIe card.
Okay.
That has multiple M2 sticks rated together so that we can increase our read-write speeds.
Sure.
And then internally for the rack, we use Dante Audio, which I'll get to that in a second. But so for audio inputs and outputs on servers, everything is just Dante. The LED wall for the tour, which came from Elite Multimedia out of Nashville, is a Rogue graphite wall. That was actually specifically chosen because, like I mentioned, they're TV guys. They want everything to look crisp. They want to see the details and the graphics. And if you've ever actually watched an episode of Good Eats, a lot of the graphics that he likes to pull up are very, very detailed with how they're designed. And so having something that's a lower res product doesn't represent the same. And so they were able to set up a demo with him to show off the graphite wall. And so he actually specifically picked the graphite panels for the tour. And I believe they're 2.6. I think it's a 2.6 wall that we have.
Mhm.
But then for the camera system, so we have two Sony FR7s with 18 to 200 millimeter lenses on them. We actually use those as our front of house cameras. Because of how small the tour is, it's only a theater run. And because of truck space, it's a one truck tour. And because of bus space, we couldn't really justify bringing another camera operator on the tour. And so the video team is just two people, myself and another gentleman who focuses on the LED wall. And so we use the FR7 with that lens as our front of house camera so that for the 2 or 3 moments in the show where we really need one, we can kind of get away with it. And so we have those cameras in crop sensor mode, and they're zoomed almost all the way in, and it works out great. And then on stage we have the Canon Sierra M300 PTZs. Those are actually owned by Alton's production company. And so we just kind of marry them into our system, which presented its own unique challenge because now we have two different brands of
Mhm.
PTZs that need to be controlled by the same person. So we have a Scarhoy PTZ controller that has phenomenal integrations with both of those PTZs. And so that kind of really helped with that side. And then there's a moment in the show where we show a hot plate and he cooks an egg live on stage. And so Fleur actually provided a camera to the tour so that we can show true thermal readings live on stage of the slab. And then there's a Sony ZV-E1 that's mounted next to it, which I have a picture of that I'll show in a moment. And so they're showing the exact same shot, but one is in infrared and then one is in real life. So you can kind of see both as he's cooking.
Mhm.
And then the Marshall CV504s, we buried those inside of a bunch of set pieces that come out in Act 2 so that we can show various camera shots of this 25-foot long set piece kind of as we're going through the action. And then inside of our system, we have a Midas M32C with a DL16 stage box. This is really just so that we can do internal audio routing, which for tech purposes worked out phenomenally. And then for the tour, it works out even better because for tech, uh, when we were in a multi-user session, the second programmer that I had with me was able to work locally at his station, completely separated from what was happening on stage during rehearsals, and he could hear audio playback locally as he was building. So there was never this moment of, hey, can we pause rehearsals so I can make sure that this is actually working? And he could always stay a couple steps ahead as we were going in real time.
Yeah, definitely gonna ask
Now for the
some
tour,
multi-user questions later on.
yeah. So kind of how, from an audio perspective, how we got around some of those is by having this Midas M32C in the rack, doing everything Dante with local speakers in the rack. And then for the tour, we get program audio sent back to us. So we use the 32C so that we can actually hear locally what is Alton's mic. So that since all of my cues, which we'll get to that in a moment, all of my cues are manual based off of certain trigger words that he says. I can actually hear what is going on. So, and then the rest of the system, it's M4250 network switches. We've got one inside our core rack, one in the PTZ rack, and then one that goes out to front of house. Since we do fiber transport for network control and video control or video receive, excuse me, of the front of house PTZ camera, uh, uh, hyperdecks so that we can record in any venues we're allowed to, just so that he has a reference of, this is what happened in these various shows. The Scarhoy PTZ controller, like I mentioned. Um, So yeah, and then the different vendors I listed out, Magic Space is the main producing company that we are working for on the tour. They're absolutely phenomenal for us to work with. Elite, like I said, provided the wall. 8 Day Sound is doing the tour audio. TMS is the tour lighting and rigging company, and then E-Rig Services provided the Kinesis motors for the LED wall. Um, so yeah, all good people. But
Awesome. And
so
just
this is
before we jump in here, just
go
a
ahead.
couple of follow-ups. On in your gear list, you've got all of the that PTZ, and I think we're going to talk about how you use control, and kind of what you're doing with cameras and control. Are you controlling cameras through that PTZ controller as well as through control? Are you like accessing some features both ways, or are you using control to mainly do like camera cutting and that kind of thing?
Currently, we're only really using it for camera cutting through the ATEM.
Mm-hmm.
We had the conversation about potentially utilizing it to do more camera control functionality, but it really just came down to a time thing of with all the chaos that we were in trying to get this whole show built in 2.5 days and ready for the first show. It just we didn't have enough time on the front end with all of the gear hooked up together to actually figure out those workflows and figure out what made sense.
Mm-hmm.
So we just kind of left it alone.
Well, yeah, I mean, sometimes you just got to go with, path of least resistance. So, as part of the control module you made then, which we'll take a look at later, it looks like you've kind of set it up so that way you can are you the one doing the PTZ control, or is someone else doing the PTZ?
So our LED engineer during show is actually doing all of the PTZ control,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm doing all the cue execution and camera cutting during
Okay.
show.
Okay. So you've that allowed you to kind of separate those two things into the two different operators. Got it.
Yep.
Okay, cool. You had a picture of your battle station there, video village, whatever. I don't know what you're calling it there.
Yeah, so this is one of our workstations that we have that we kind of internally have been joking that we put 50 pounds of crap inside of a 5 pound bag, because for this tour, since it's a one truck tour, it is probably one of the tightest truck packs I've ever seen.
Hmm.
Like we are wall to wall, floor to ceiling, front to back on that entire truck. And so being able to condense everything into a single workstation that was fast to load in, fast to load out, but also took up as least amount of space as possible was a really important item that we knew from the beginning. And so this one rack holds the entire show basically. The only exception to that is the front of house rack that we have, which obviously has the network switch that I mentioned and the SDI to fiber converter for the front of house PTZ camera, and then the PTZ rack, which in the photo on the right, you can kind of see it sitting on top of the processor rack in the right hand side of the photo,
Mm.
which hold a monitor, a network switch, a Stream Deck Studio, and some other little bits and pieces specifically for our PTZ operator. Um, but yeah, so this is everything. So on the left hand side, you can kind of see like that's what I stare at during show. So I've got my PIXERA window up on the left hand side, ATEM multi-view on the right. Behind my laptop screen is a Stream Deck Studio that we've configured to control everything inside the rack. So there's moments in the show where my left hand is on the iPad hitting cues, and my right hand is on the studio cutting cameras or doing other audio routing things throughout the show. And then the speakers up on top. Yeah,
So
it's a very tight
yeah,
rack pack.
a lot going on. On that
Yeah.
Stream Deck Studio, are you doing any? Are you accessing Pixera anyway there, or have the ability to, even if you're not necessarily doing it during the show?
Yeah, so we have it set up to where I can. There's a couple moments where we actually set it up to trigger Pixera through control,
Mm-hmm.
because then we embedded buttons inside Companion to trigger a couple different devices on the network at the same time, and then we just added a button in control that is pressing the companion button. So it's kind of pressing the companion button to tell control what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing as what we mentioned earlier. It became a time thing of this is the path of least resistance to trigger these multiple devices at the same time,
Yeah.
but I still need a button on my control page. So let's just do this and move on.
Yeah, even if maybe you could, with a couple more hours of programming, get it to all work with one button press in one device.
Yep.
Sometimes is again path of least resistance. You make it work when you're under pressure, and I think that's. Talk to me about like how does control allow you to have that flexibility? Talk to me a little bit about that process of using control to kind of access some of those things and be able to have that flexibility when you're on site.
Yeah. So a huge reason why we honestly started putting PIXERA on a lot of the shows that we do is because of control specifically. Having a way to build out a custom user interface, whether it be for us, for a producer, for the client, for a second operator, whoever it is, uh, and be able to add functionality onto the user interface, but also add ways to queue and trigger elements of the show without having to either recode entire engines in other platforms or copy paste API handles from one thing into the next, but just be able to have instant access to all of it. Uh, that really has proved time and time again to really help us with how quickly we can build out shows and build out mechanisms for controlling them. But also for esports, to kind of talk about those projects for a second. Esports specifically is where we've seen the biggest advantage because with control, uh, we don't get API data straight from gameplay. And so using control, we've built out these entire backend mechanisms that we can set various variables that then when we press show start, depending on who we selected to be the house left team, the house right team, what players are sitting in what order on stage, what map, what mode, what fly through, all these things, all we have to do is then just press show start, map fly through, you know, back to gameplay, whatever it is. And all the variable programming is in the background, but it's referencing actual programming and content that exists within PIXERA. And so instead of having to live link anything else, it's just all on one platform, which for us also helps on larger projects of if we have to dump over to another server, should the main processors go to, or the main main servers go down, it kind of helps us with managing how does that happen and how do we keep our control engine running and keep hold of what's happening in the show, but also monitor what's happening in the show at real time so we can try to preempt anything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the the fact that you're able to do all that through control is I think one of the coolest things about it. Talk to us about the cameras that all the cameras that you've embedded into the set and kind of how that makes. I mean, this is for what is from outside looking in. If you don't know Alton Brown, it's kind of it's somewhere between a stand-up and a monologue, so you wouldn't really think there's this many cameras. So, I mean, this is a lot of control, a lot of, a lot of capture going on. Talk to us about all this.
Yeah. So, like I said, the FR7 we have out at front of house, which just kind of acts as our front of house camera. But then on stage, we have the three CRN 300 cannons that are all PTZs, one that goes stage left, one downstage center, and one stage right. So during the show, the PTZs kind of act as our main action pickup. There's a few moments in the show where we actually will put them on screen. There's a moment where he walks up holding something and gets very close to the camera, and so we put that up on the screen so that the audience can actually see what is he actually talking about, what is he referencing, what is he trying to show off. But then all the POV cameras, which you can kind of see in this, they're the four across the top and then the one on the side. Like I mentioned, he has this 25-foot long set piece, that has these very specific action moments that he highlights as he's kind of setting up what he's doing. That something from the beginning that was very important to him is, being able to show the audience that action as close as possible, but also in a way that's fun. Um, so all these different cameras, they're capturing different action points of this entire set piece as everything is kind of moving through it. But they're in very specific moments where the first camera is showing a conveyor belt and stuff is flying towards it.
Mm.
The second one is showing this spinning object that looks like a giant, mesmerizing wheel. Another one is showing the contestants that are on stage interacting with this, kind of as they're in the final moments and they're rushing through. But for us, what really mattered was having a camera system that was native SDI. So that we didn't have to have, on top of having cameras embedded all over the place, we didn't have to worry about figuring out where to stash decimators or cross converters.
Hmm.
But also having something that we could do interchangeable lenses on. And so all these cameras, they're all the same Marshall CV504s. They use an M12 type lens,
Hmm.
which Marshall will probably tell you that you have to buy their lenses. Fun fact: the massive lens that you see in the far right top photo is actually a variable zoom lens for those cameras. It was $19 on Amazon
Wow.
with next day shipping.
Wow.
So a lot of kind of what we did for this was just figuring out like what are the action points you want us to catch, and then we just showed up with a bunch of lenses and figured out what do we want. A bunch of them are at like crazy Dutch angles where we're almost sideways.
Mm.
But it's kind of meant to be like a carnival-esque style moment. So it all plays together.
Very cool. Uh, Very cool. Is that? I think that's it. Before we jump to the project, is there anything else you wanted to mention in the slideshow?
I don't think so. I don't. Oh yeah, that was that during show. Yeah, no, that was it.
Great. We'll leave that there for a sec. So let's pull up the project file here. And why don't you kind of just walk us through it? And I'm going to I've got an output active, so I can bring that up on the stream so we can kind of see what the output's doing. But yeah, just walk us through some of the show file a little bit. You're using PIXERA 25.1 Inter 15, which I should mention is technically an intermediate version of PIXERA and is a beta. But Bryce is quite experienced with using our beta versions and kind of knows what comes with that. That not everything is, there may be some things that aren't, haven't been fully QA'd. So, talk to us a little bit about the show file.
Yeah, so funny enough that you mentioned all that. Ferris, who's on my team, is really the one that wanted to use 25.1 Inter 15. I always get nervous with beta builds. He's the one that honestly is a little bit more, let's live on the edge. And I have to give it to him. There's a lot of things that are in 25.1 Inter 15 that actually proved very crucial to us for this project. And so it's a lot of the feature sets that have been added into this build specifically have really helped us kind of adapt and adjust to various workflows that we've been wanting for a while, or workflows that we didn't even know that we could get into until all of a sudden the feature was there and it was like, oh, well, now we can just do this instead. So I have to give props to him because I wanted to stay on the latest and greatest stable build.
Shout out
Um,
Ferris. We're
but
big fans of Ferris over here.
yeah, I'm sure you love the amount of tickets he submits.
Oh, we love all the tickets.
Random questions, um, but yeah. So overall, the project file, because of how, well, I guess let me back up. So because of how he wanted to present the show from a theatrical standpoint, but from a storytelling, almost TV style standpoint, For us, it was very clear very, very early on that we needed something that was timeline based, because the entire show, the way that everything flows from beginning to end, there are no crossfades, there are no hard cuts of anything except for hard camera cuts. Like everything has some form of an animation to get us in and out of these various scenes and moments. The only time that we crossfade is if he either jumps a section or he calls for something before it was supposed to go up. Then we have a way to just crossfade to the queue and then crossfade back to where we were. But a lot of how this is built out, it's specifically structured around that mentality. So in the actual show, we have two servers, a primary and a backup, that we run as independent from each other. In a during tech, they were in a multi-user session. Now they just run independent to each other, just as like a kind of a hot cold swap
Yeah.
style background
So if something goes
backup
wrong,
solution.
if
Excuse me.
something goes wrong, you're just switching over to the other output, and
Yeah,
that's
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And for us, it just made sense with how we have some other things that are going on. Uh, right now, kind of as you mentioned earlier, we're still constantly reprogramming this show because we did just launch the show about 10, 12 days ago. Actually, yesterday during intermission, he came side stage and was like, can this stay up longer when we get to this? And so during intermission, I was moving content, adjusting keyframes, doing a bunch of stuff. So we're still actively building the show, but yeah, so it's two servers, main backup,
Mm-hmm.
and it's only one upstage LED wall. So because it was only the one wall, we actually just used the built-in graphite profile that's in PIXERA
Mm-hmm.
to build out our wall. So that's that. From compositing standpoint, uh, we have a bunch of a bunch of timelines that, for the most part, it's really broken down per act. So, program is our bail timeline that
Mm-hmm.
just lets us quickly get a camera shot up and take a camera shot down. There's been a couple moments where he'll walk up to a camera without any form of a warning. He'll start kind of talking to the camera or showing a prop to the camera, and so it's our bail option to get it up very quickly. Show, this is where we actually have our pre-show looping assets. We have a VIP moment that we say welcome VIPs, which currently we're missing all those assets. Sorry. And then an intermission loop that plays. Act one, this is the entire timeline for Act one. So to kind of give you an example, stop, please. So this is kind of some of what you see on the
Mm-hmm.
tour. Like as everything comes in and we talk about a scene, it builds in gradually.
Mm-hmm.
And then, at one moment he talks about going to the local library.
Oh,
And so
very
the
cool.
library pulls on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of how we go through the show. And it's all very timeline sequenced out, to the point where you could honestly just sit in front of the user interface and just click next, 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 and it would run perfectly. Um, I personally prefer to go by the control page that we built, just because we're able to go in and label everything based off of what I always call safe names. So the Q is the safe name of the word he's going to say, or something that makes me think of the cue that actually needs to be applied. Whereas all of the content as it was delivered in these elements of 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and it's so generic, I have no idea what I'm staring at. So, so yeah, lots of pause and play cues all the way down this whole timeline. Then we get down to the love tunnel timeline, which this is an element that happens in the second act, where one of the POV cameras is shooting down down this tunnel, for this set piece that I keep referencing, and he calls it the love tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And so we built out a way that when I press POV 5 on our control surface, it actually triggers this timeline that has POV 5 coming into the server on a separate input from program. So that way, every time I trigger it, this kind of heart overlay comes in, and we kind of make the joke that it's the love tunnel. Um, Same thing with Act Two. Just a whole long timeline. This is where we kind of get some very interesting programming, which I'll hold off on for a second until I show off the control page. Um, but then the sound effect timeline. This actually came about because um, he had all these sound effects that for this run he wanted to play based off of his script. And on a typical tour, that's something that would come out of a QLab system, or audio would be triggering it off of something. But for this project, because I was already having to follow him to the script, it actually just made more natural sense for me to take it on. Um, and a lot of the sound effects are actually built in such a way that when we trigger a cue, it just automatically triggers the sound effect either instantly, or what I've started adding in is time-based delays. So that when I trigger the cue, the on-screen movement happens, and then after it happens, because he is so to the script, then the sound effect triggers based off of when it should. So that way, to me, it's one button press instead of two button presses. Um, and then, yeah, utility is just our test patterns, and client hold is where we just kind of dumped stuff if we wanted a
Sponsors for the
playground to.
yeah, sponsor loop for
Yeah,
whatever specific venue or something like that might happen.
yeah, just kind of generic stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Very cool. So yeah, let's talk about the control. You can either go to the control tab, or I pulled it up in one of those Firefox windows. I'll let you kind of take your pick.
yeah, so inside control. Again, to mention Ferris on my team, he's done a really good job building out, based off of various projects that we do, this custom control module that we have that gives us our user interface, uh, which is this guy. So all of the shows that we do, they all have some instance of this control UI, that then we just change the labels of the view pages, and then we change what is each button triggering. But the core module itself, we export and import on every single project so that we're not always starting from scratch. So the way that this works is, at the top of show, the first thing that happens is our VIP moment, where VIP gets to come into the theater 30 minutes early. They get to ask him questions and kind of have a Q&A moment. And then we go into our walk-in look, and then the blackout look, before we go into Act One. So Act One, these are all the cues in Act One. The program timeline, as I mentioned, as our kind of fail-safe, they exist on every single view, and then the sound effects exists on every view, just so that if he were to ever call for a random sound effect, I have the ability to just trigger it. Which this is actually only a few of the sound effects. He added more yesterday that I have to go in and add. Um, but then something else that we did was, like I mentioned, the whole show is very scripted. It goes from beginning to end continuously. But every so often he starts to slip script, and he might start to jump a cue, or he might, jump backwards, and he expects the screen to kind of come with him in that moment. So we've added a way where if we're running normally, I can just press cut, and every time I hit a cue, it just hard cuts to that, whatever that cue value is. But if I have it selected as fade, it will crossfade to that cue. So that way I can jump over moments. And if you see the tail end of an animation, it's crossfading out very quickly, and it's not this jarring motion to the audience.
And
and then we can
and
also,
just can I dig in on that a little bit on the back end? And
yeah,
Ferris, I think, is in the chat. Maybe he can jump in if he's got the answer. But the on the back end, you're doing a fade to cue call in PIXERA, as opposed either
correct.
way, just one of them is 0 frames and one of them has frames of blend added in.
Correct. Yeah. All these buttons are they are applying a cue value that is whatever we have named the cue flag. And so the cut and fade is really just telling it either go to it in 0 frames or go to it in. I have this thing where a half second feels too fast and a second feels too slow, but 0.7 seconds of a crossfade feels just right. And so Ferris did the math and figured out it's 42 frames based off of a 60 frame system.
Mm.
And so it's either 0 frames or it's 42 frames to crossfade or jump to these different moments.
Right.
So, but yeah, and then we have this right here is all of the cues that are on the Act 1 timeline. And so as we go through Act 1, this will actually live track in this window. So that way I always kind of have a separate eye to make sure that like we are actually where we need to be. But also there's a few moments where I have to give counts to other departments of the show. And so this gives me a way to see it just on my iPad interface. Which this window is sized specifically for a 13-inch iPad Pro, which is what I actually use to operate the show and drive the show. So yeah, Act 2 is kind of more of the same thing. And then ATEM is where we have a lot of the magic.
Oh, wow.
And this is where we did a lot more work because for this for the prop that we do in the second act, part of the setup to it is it's like I mentioned, it's a giant hot dog cooker, and there's 4 people that come up on stage that get to participate in it. And before we start, they spin a wheel to pick which condiments are they going to use to decorate the hot dogs at the very end. And so we have this built in a way where Wienercam Engage brings in program on the screen, and then prep the condiments basically sets us at a point in the timeline to where once we're there, jump over to that. So prep the condiments gets us to this point. So we're now on that control page, I can select, are we on spin 1? And then whatever the wheel lands on, if I click ketchup, it sets that value and plays the timeline to reveal ketchup in the screen.
Very cool.
And so then same thing, you know, when spin 2 comes up, move this over here. Then I can say, you know, spin 2 is mustard, and it automatically pops up on the bottom of the screen. 3 can be kraut, 4 can be chili. Oh, I think I know what's going on.
It's okay. It's also not on the actual system, so it's possible that in my prep of this, I missed a handle or 2.
Yep. But so all those condiments pop up, but it's all based off, because it's all variable of like they're spinning a wheel and we truthfully have no idea what they're going to pick.
So this is a physical wheel. It is not a digital wheel that is being spun. There is no, you can't seed it. It's a physical wheel. Someone spins it. Correct. And you need to react to whatever the actual that content needs to be variable depending on
Correct.
what it is. And I notice you're using, I think, a multi-resource to do that. So is it setting positional data in that multi-resource? Is that what essentially that catch-up button is doing there?
So what's actually happening is it is a multi-resource that then we're doing a content mapping to put it across the bottom in those 4 elements. And when we select spin 1, it's setting a variable data in the background and control that will assign a new asset to that area in the multi-resource. And then when I press, you know, in this instance, if I press ketchup, what it's actually doing is it's assigning the ketchup asset to that area of the multi-resource, but then it's also clicking play on the timeline playhead, which has a keyframe scale and move up to reveal ketchup on it. And so then at the very end, once, you know, and then spin 2, spin 3, spin 4, it's doing the same thing across the bottom until the bottom of the screen shows all 4 that have been randomly selected. Once we do that, then I have the remove the chosen button. Same thing. It basically presses play on the final pause cue, and it animates all 4 of them back down off screen. So it's really currently with how it's built, because this is actually something we just added 3 days ago. Because they would spin the wheel and then everybody would forget what they landed on once they got to the 4th spin. And so we started doing this so that everybody could actually remember what are we supposed to be, like what condiments are supposed to be going on these hot dogs.
I mean, the fact that you
Um,
were able to put all this in 3 days is pretty impressive. So, love that. Love that.
yeah, we built it in like an hour.
Yeah,
Like it went from a can we do this to an hour later. I was going back to him saying, "You'll see it on the bottom of the screen. It's done."
that's awesome.
Um, so yeah,
And we're approaching time here, but can you talk a little bit about how you're using the ATEM? Because I know that's a lot of where some of this really cool control stuff is happening.
yeah. So inside this same page, when we get into this moment, um, uh, the program preview is referencing companion buttons externally to set the cameras in program and preview so that during this moment, I can hold the iPad and be able to hit all of these cues plus cut cameras at the same time without having to have my hand on two different surfaces or without having to track anything else. Because what's also happening in this moment is the timer start and pause timer functions. We're putting a live timer on stage and we're actually tracking how long it takes the contestants to get through this entire action. And then based off of how they do, we are removing or adding time to their score, which is then updating a table in the background based off the city we're in.
Wow.
And then we reveal a scoreboard based off of where does that city rank on the tour with all of the other cities we've
Oh
been to
wow.
so far.
Wow.
So the ATEM, like how we built out this page, it's so that I can do all of that. I can show all the condiments, I can do all of the stuff with the scoreboard, but also cut cameras on top of it at the same time. And so being able to build all that into this page has really, really helped out a lot. But kind of the same thing. It was a time thing. We were going to try to integrate it directly with the API of the ATEM, and we just very quickly were like, or we could sleep for an hour if we do it through Companion instead and just reference it that way. So, but the program preview do actually track to where when I press something in program, the red button changes over to there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's actually tracking what camera is live where based off of variable feedback from the ATEM and from Companion.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's why Companion's such a great tool. Is it kind of gives you, it takes away some of that API futziness because it's kind of got that all built in, so you don't have to go do it all custom yourself.
Yeah.
And
Well,
being able
and
to
we
integrate
also,
with Companion is great.
yeah, and for us, it also worked out because the PTZ operator in other moments of the show where cameras aren't live on screen, he has a stream deck in front of him that he's actually cutting cameras just for record's sake.
Mm,
So it makes that handoff a little bit easier to where I can have a control surface how I need it for this very intense cue heavy moment of the show. But then for the rest of the show, when I'm focused on other cues, he can be cutting cameras for records that magic space can then take for whatever they want to do with
right,
do with it. So
right. Anything else you want to show? This is awesome.
no, I think honestly that sums up a lot of kind of what we're doing. So this page really is like the most intense moment of the whole show. Which, like I said, for us it's as simple as we can pick the city that that we're in. So Norfolk is our show tomorrow. Whenever we get their score, we just type in the score, we hit commit, and then when we hit scoreboard reveal, it goes to that moment, does an animation, and then
Oh,
reveals,
that's so cool.
who slots into where on that scoreboard.
That's so cool. I love that it auto updates, that all the assets are there, that PIXERA can kind of pick it dynamically, and that
Yeah.
this module that you and Ferris have built is able to kind of accommodate all those things. Yeah, look, there it is on the back end. So
Yeah.
that
So
control
there's the
module
back end of it.
is committing to in here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's based off of the current city that I've selected. It's then assigning that value that I typed into that text space. And then when I press commit, it's committing it into this space.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I select this scoreboard reveal button, what it does is it actually animates, to back this up a little bit. Oop.
There it is.
What it does is it plays to show where the current standings are first. So that way everyone gets a glimpse of like what is the current scoreboard,
Mm-hmm.
and then it does a flipboard animation on top, and then the current city we're in shows up in yellow text so that they can instantly see where they rank. And then when we go to the next city, you know, they go back to being white text. They have their slot on the scoreboard, and then the current city changes, and then we go through the whole process again.
And it looks like same thing, using multi-resource there to be able to select a pre-built color, like a pre-built asset that has Sarasota in that font and has it already built out, and you're just kind of dynamically selecting the asset to be able to animate it in.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. Great use of multi-resource. I love that, and how that just allows you to make something that looks. I mean, this is clearly created content. This is, someone made this. They spent their time on it, but it is dynamic in the sense that it's not. You are able to update it and engage the audience in a kind of an interesting way. Love it. Well, thank you so much, Bryce. I'm going to pause. There's not a ton of people here, but we'll ask to see if anyone has any questions. And then we'll go from there. Not a ton of people in chat, but that's okay. Well, we'll kind of leave it there. Let's see here. Ferris, thank you, or sorry, Kongvold, thank you so much to you and Ferris for, I wanted to thank him, that's where my mind was, for taking the time, especially because you're out on the road right now. So I know that it's tricky to step away and be able to talk about something like this, but I really appreciate it. And I think this is a really cool documentation of what you've done here. It's a really great use case of using control on a timeline based show, and how you can leverage control to do some things that maybe other options out there wouldn't let you do. So very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, thanks for inviting me to talk about it. This is I loved when I got to work with Alton on the last run. I was very excited to be able to work with him again this time. And I was excited to be able to bring a platform like this to him, to where the scoreboard was actually one of the items that when we initially talked, he didn't think was possible. And originally we were just going to fake it. And we were very quick to kind of bring up the fact that like this can be dynamic if you want it to be. Like that's a very easy thing for us to build, just say the word.
Yeah.
And so being able to have these tools at our hands to offer it to our clients has been phenomenal.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I hope if you're watching this on record, thanks for sticking around and watching it. And yeah, we'll see y'all later. Have a good one.